Dear listener, welcome once more to the Hercule Poirot Story Podcast, where the little gray cells awaken to unravel the most perplexing enigmas of the human soul. Tonight, we invite you to don your evening attire, pour a cup of tisane, and immerse yourself in a tale of deception, artistry, and deadly intrigue. The Poisoned Portrait, Hercule Poirot's deadly clue. As the wind howls through the chimneys, echoing like the whispers of ghosts long silenced, we beckon you to join us. Sharpen your wits, dear sleuths, for clues lurk in every shadow, every glance, every unspoken word. Engage with us. Share your deductions on social media using the Hercule Poirot podcast, or ponder aloud in our listener forums. But beware, in the world of Hercule Poirot, nothing is as it seems. Now, let the curtain rise. Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. In the year of our Lord, 1927, amidst the undulating verdant hills of Devonshire, where the ancient earth seemed to whisper secrets through the veils of perpetual mist, stood Blackwood Manor, a bastion of Elizabethan grandeur, its gray stone facade etched with the inexorable passage of centuries. The manor, perched upon a promontory overlooking the tempestuous English Channel, was a symphony of architectural splendor and subtle decay. Towering chimneys that belched forth plumes of smoke like sighs from a weary giant, mullioned windows that captured the fleeting sunlight in prismatic displays, and vast halls adorned with tapestries depicting forgotten battles and mythic quests. Yet, beneath this veneer of opulence lurked an undercurrent of melancholy, as if the very walls absorbed the sorrows of those who dwelt within. The air, heavy with the brine of distant seas and the earthy perfume of rain-soaked soil, carried a chill that penetrated to the marrow, a harbinger of the storm that brewed not merely in the heavens, but in the hearts of men. On this particular eve, as the autumnal sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery crimson, a tempest gathered force. Thunder rumbled like the distant artillery of some celestial war, and sheets of rain lashed against the leaded panes with the fury of unquiet spirits. It was a night tailor-made for intrigue, for the unveiling of treasures and the unmasking of treacheries. Sir Reginald Hawthorne, the undisputed lord of this domain, had summoned a coterie of intimates to bear witness to his latest triumph, the acquisition of a portrait so rare, so enigmatic, that it promised to eclipse even the jewels of his already formidable collection. Sir Reginald himself was a figure of imposing presence, a man whose 58 years had sculpted him into a paragon of aristocratic vigor. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a mane of silver hair that cascaded like a waterfall over his high forehead, he possessed eyes of piercing azure that appraised the world with the cold precision of a jeweler examining a flawed gem. His attire, a bespoke tuxedo of midnight wool, accented by a cravat of shimmering silk, bespoke his wealth, amassed through a lifetime of astute dealings in the shadowy realms of antiquities. Yet, to delve into the psyche of Sir Reginald was to navigate a labyrinth of contradictions. Outwardly the epitome of cultured refinement, he harbored a soul as covetous as Midas, his affections tyrannical and his forgiveness as scarce as desert rain. He viewed art not merely as aesthetic delight, but as conquest, each piece a trophy in his relentless pursuit of immortality through possession. His marriage to Lady Amelia had long since calcified into a union of convenience, marred by infidelities that he pursued with the same zeal as his artifacts, leaving her a spectral presence in his life. His nephew, Arthur, he regarded with a mixture of paternal disdain and calculated benevolence, dangling the promise of inheritance like a carrot before a famished steed. To his associates and servants, he was a taskmaster whose praise was rare and whose rebukes cut like a stiletto. The drawing room, where the assemblage convened, was a chamber of lavish excess, its walls lined with masterpieces that spanned epochs, from the brooding shadows of Rembrandt to the vibrant swirls of Van Gogh. A colossal fireplace, its maw agape with roaring flames, cast flickering illuminations that danced upon the polished oak floors and the intricate Persian rugs underfoot. Crystal chandeliers dangled from the coffered ceiling, their prisms refracting light into a myriad of rainbows, while the air was redolent with the scents of beeswax candles, aged port, and the faint exotic tang of incense from distant lands. At the room's focal point stood an easel shrouded in velvet drapery, concealing the object of the evening's anticipation, the portrait of a lady, attributed to the masterful hand of Leonardo da Vinci. Sir Reginald had procured it from a clandestine auction in Paris, outbidding rivals with a sum that could ransom a king. The painting depicted a woman of transcendent beauty, her countenance enigmatic, her lips curved in a smile that hinted at profound secrets, her eyes possessing that uncanny quality of following the observer, as if judging the worth of their soul. Among the guests, 5 figures stood out, each a thread in the intricate web of motive and malice that fate had woven around Sir Reginald. Lady Amelia Hawthorne, his consort of 2 decades, glided into the room with the grace of a swan upon a tranquil lake. Slender and ethereal, her form was sheathed in a gown of emerald silk that cascaded like a waterfall, accentuating her alabaster skin and the auburn tresses coiled in an elegant chignon. Her hazel eyes, framed by lashes of delicate length, held a luminosity that belied the shadows within. Psychologically, she was a study in restrained turmoil. Outwardly, the devoted wife, fulfilling her role with impeccable poise, yet inwardly, a cauldron of resentment simmered. Sir Reginald's dalliances had eroded her spirit, his control over the family fortunes rendering her a gilded captive. She yearned for liberation, perhaps in the arms of a clandestine paramour, her mind a repository of unspoken grievances and calculated dreams of autonomy. Beside her lingered Arthur Hawthorne, Sir Reginald's nephew and heir, presumptive, a lanky youth of 25, whose disheveled blonde locks and shadowed green eyes bespoke a life teetering on the precipice of ruin. Clad in a somewhat rumpled evening suit, he fidgeted with the cuff of his sleeve, his pallor suggesting nights haunted by the specter of insolvency. Arthur's psyche was a tempest of desperation and entitlement. His uncle's wealth tantalized him, yet Sir Reginald's parsimony, doling out allowances with lectures on fiscal prudence, fueled a burgeoning rage. Gambling dens had claimed his fortunes, leaving him ensnared by creditors whose demands grew ever more insistent. Inheritance loomed as his sole beacon of salvation, a motive that gnawed at his conscience like a persistent rodent. Victor Lang, the art dealer from the bustling thoroughfares of London, presented a contrast in rotundity and meticulous grooming. His corpulent frame was encased in a tailored frock coat, his waxed mustache curling with affected elegance above a beak-like nose upon which perched gold-rimmed spectacles. His brown eyes darted with the acuity of a fox, assessing values and vulnerabilities alike. Victor's mind was a forge of envy and ambition. Sir Reginald's public accusation of trafficking in forgeries had besmirched his reputation, imperiling his livelihood among the elite collectors of Mayfair. Revenge festered within him, a psychological undercurrent that manifested in subtle barbs and calculated silences. His knowledge of arcane poisons, gleaned from restoring tainted canvases, adding a layer of ominous potential. Eliza Thorne, the housemaid of Blackwood Manor, moved among the guests with the unobtrusive efficiency of a shadow. Petite and unassuming, her mousy brown hair was pinned in a severe bun, her gray uniform starched to perfection, her downcast eyes concealing a gaze sharp as a dagger. At 30 years, she embodied the archetype of dutiful servitude, yet her psyche harbored abysses of humiliation and vengeance. Sir Reginald's tyrannical demeanor, harsh reprimands for the slightest imperfection, coupled with unwelcome advances that left her dignity in tatters, had kindled a fire of resentment. She navigated the manor's corridors like a ghost, privy to secrets that could unravel reputations, her mind a vault of observed indiscretions. Finally, Thomas Black, the estate's grizzled gardener, loomed by the periphery, his burly frame clad in a tweed jacket ill-suited to the formal occasion, his weathered face a map of toil etched by sun and sorrow. 45 years of labor had calloused his hands and hardened his resolve, his dark eyes smoldering with unspoken fury. Thomas's psychology was rooted in quiet endurance, yet a profound grudge against Sir Reginald simmered beneath. The master had dismissed his cautions about the manor's crumbling foundations, endangering lives for the sake of economy. Whispers in the servants' quarters hinted at a deeper scandal involving Thomas's late sister, once employed in the household, her fate intertwined with Sir Reginald's caprices in ways that bred eternal enmity. As the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 9, its sonorous tones reverberating through the manor like a summons from destiny, Sir Reginald raised a crystal goblet filled with ruby port. "To art eternal," he proclaimed, his voice resonant with triumph, echoing off the paneled walls. The guests murmured assent, their glasses clinking in a facsimile of camaraderie. Sir Reginald approached the easel, his fingers, strong and unyielding, grasping the velvet shroud. With a flourish, he unveiled the portrait, eliciting gasps of admiration. The lady's gaze seemed to pierce the assembly, her smile a riddle that invited speculation. In his exuberance, Sir Reginald dusted the frame with a silken cloth, his hands lingering upon the canvas as if to absorb its essence, tracing the contours with a reverence bordering on obsession. Yet as the applause subsided, a subtle pallor crept over his features, like frost upon a window pane. He set down his glass with a clatter, his hand clutching at his throat. "The portrait! It burns!" he gasped, his voice a strangled whisper that cut through the room like a blade. His body convulsed, eyes widening in uncomprehending horror, before he crumpled to the floor in a heap of limbs and finery. The assembly froze in tableau. Lady Amelia's scream shattered the paralysis, a piercing wail that summoned servants from the shadows. Arthur knelt beside his uncle, futilely seeking a pulse, his face a mask of feigned concern mingled with opportunistic gleam. Victor Lang hovered near, his spectacles glinting as he examined the fallen man with an air of professional detachment that masked deeper calculations. Eliza Thorne darted forth with a pitcher of water, splashing it ineffectually upon Sir Reginald's contorted visage. Thomas Black remained by the door, his arms crossed, his expression impassive as granite, betraying no emotion save perhaps a flicker of grim satisfaction. The local physician, Dr. Hargrove, a portly gentleman of advancing years, summoned post-haste through the driving rain, arrived within the hour, his black bag clutched like a talisman against the night's malevolence. After a cursory examination, he straightened, his brow furrowed in perplexity. "Poison," he declared solemnly, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Yet no evident vessel, no tainted chalice, no vial concealed. The symptoms suggest a rare contact toxin, absorbed through the skin. Look to what he touched last. All eyes turned to the portrait, innocuous in its beauty, yet bearing faint smudges where Sir Reginald's fingers had caressed it. The room descended into a cacophony of whispers and accusations, the storm outside mirroring the chaos within. Word of the tragedy spread like wildfire through the county, reaching even the ears of the renowned Belgian detective, Hercule Poirot, who was sojourning nearby in Torquay for a respite from his exertions. Entreated by telegram from the local constabulary, Poirot arrived by the morrow's train, his compact form alighting with the precision of a well-oiled mechanism. His egg-shaped head, crowned by an impeccably waxed mustache, tilted in contemplation as he surveyed the manor. His eyes, dark and penetrating as obsidian, gleamed with the anticipation of intellectual conquest. Clad in a tailored overcoat and patent leather shoes that defied the muddied paths, he carried a cane that tapped rhythmically, a metronome for his thoughts. "Messieurs et mesdames," Poirot intoned upon entering the drawing-room, his accent a melodic blend of French inflections and Belgian exactitude. "The method is most ingenious. Poison, oui, but how administered? Ah, that is the question that tickles the little gray cells. Fear not. Hercule Poirot shall unravel this enigma, for no secret can elude the order and method of the mind." The suspects exchanged wary glances, each mind a fortress of concealed truths, as the rain continued its relentless assault upon Blackwood Manor. The gathering storm had broken, but the true tempest of suspicion, revelation, and justice was only just beginning. Chapter 2. Shadows of Suspicion. The morrow dawned upon Blackwood Manor with a pall of unrelenting gray, the skies weeping in a desultory drizzle that blurred the boundaries between earth and heaven. The ancient edifice, shrouded in mist that clung to its battlements like the ghosts of ancestral regrets, seemed to exhale a sigh of foreboding. Within its labyrinthine corridors, where the echoes of footsteps reverberated like accusations unspoken, Hercule Poirot embarked upon his methodical inquisition. The library, a sanctum of erudition and enigma, served as his arena, walls lined with tomes bound in calfskin, their spines gilded with the wisdom of ages, and a vast oak table scarred by the pens of generations. The air was redolent with the musty perfume of antiquity, mingled with the acrid residue of the previous night's fire, now reduced to embers that glowed feebly in the grate. Creaking floorboards beneath the Persian carpets betrayed the weight of secrets, while distant thunder rolled like the ominous prelude to a symphony of revelation. Poirot, seated in a high-backed armchair upholstered in faded damask, adjusted his pince-nez with deliberate precision, his mustache, a masterpiece of waxed symmetry, twitching in anticipation. His mind, that unparalleled engine of deduction, hummed with the orchestration of facts and fancies. The poison, he had ascertained from Dr. Hargrove's preliminary report, was a derivative of arsenic, cunningly formulated as a contact, toxin, insidious in its latency, manifesting symptoms only after prolonged exposure through the dermis. The portrait, that enigmatic lady with her Mona Lisa-esque allure, bore traces of the substance upon its surface, applied with the subtlety of an artist's brushstroke. Who, among the assemblage, possessed the knowledge and opportunity to perpetrate such a deed? Poirot's gray cells, those indefatigable sentinels, began their vigilant patrol. He summoned Lady Amelia Hawthorne first, her entrance a whisper of silk against the threshold. She perched upon the edge of a chaise longue, her emerald gown from the previous eve now exchanged for a somber ensemble of charcoal gray. Her auburn locks restrained in a chignon that accentuated the pallor of her countenance. Her hazel eyes, veiled by a film of unshed tears, betrayed a psyche fractured by the dual prongs of grief and liberation. Outwardly composed, she embodied the archetype of the grieving widow, yet Poirot discerned the undercurrents, a subtle tremor in her fingers, a fleeting glance toward the window as if seeking escape from the manor's oppressive embrace. "Madame," Poirot intoned, his voice a velvet cadence laced with Belgian inflection, "one must commence with the intimates. Pray, recount your movements upon the fatal eve." Lady Amelia's response was measured, her tone modulated with the refinement of breeding. "Monsieur Poirot, my husband was exacting in his demands, a connoisseur not merely of art, but of control. Yet I harbored no malice sufficient for murder. At the hour of the unveiling, I was in the conservatory, tending to my orchids, those delicate blooms that thrive in seclusion, much as I have these many years." She paused, her fingers absently twisting a handkerchief embroidered with initials that Poirot noted were not her own. J.L., a potential cipher for a paramour, or perhaps a red herring sown by fate or felon. Psychologically, her resentment was palpable. Sir Reginald's infidelities had eroded her dignity, transforming affection into a calcified resentment, her mind a garden where thorns outnumbered blossoms. Poirot probed gently. "And this handkerchief, madame, it bears markings unfamiliar. A memento, perhaps." Her cheeks flushed faintly. "A trifle from a dear friend, nothing more." Yet the evasion lingered like incense, a clue to hidden motives of escape and inheritance. Next entered Arthur Hawthorne, his lanky frame slouching into the chair with the reluctance of a schoolboy summoned to the headmaster's study. His blonde locks, disheveled as if tousled by inner tempests, framed a face etched with the pallor of dissipation. Clad in a tweed suit rumpled from sleepless vigil, his green eyes darted evasively, revealing a psyche besieged by desperation. Gambling had ensnared him in a vortex of debt, his uncle's parsimony a constant goad to fantasies of sudden wealth. "Uncle was a miser, sir," Arthur confessed, his voice laced with bitterness, "lecturing me on prudence while hoarding fortunes. But poison? Absurd. I was fetching brandy from the cellar when the cry arose. Eliza can vouch for it." Poirot's eyes narrowed, observing the youth's fidgeting hands, a psychological tell of unease. Outside the library window, a footprint in the sodden earth caught his gaze, matching the tread of Arthur's boots, yet suspiciously pristine amid the deluge, as if imprinted post-storm. "This print, monsieur, it suggests proximity to the scene. A coincidence?" Arthur blanched. "Merely from earlier wanderings, I assure you." The alibi held, yet inconsistencies whispered. The cellar door, per the butler's log, had been secured. Motive loomed large, inheritance to salve his wounds. Yet was it sufficient for such calculated malice? Victor Lang followed, his rotund figure waddling into the room with the ponderous dignity of a penguin upon ice. Adjusting his spectacles upon his beak-like nose, he settled into the chair, his waxed mustache quivering with indignation. His brown eyes, shrewd and appraising, concealed a soul festering with envy. Sir Reginald's accusations of forgery had tarnished his repute among London salons, threatening ruin. "Monsieur Poirot," he began, his voice oily with feigned deference, "I am a dealer in beauties, not poisons. Sir Reginald impugned my honor over that portrait's provenance, a baseless slander. I examined the frame earlier, yes, but touched naught but the edges." Poirot noted Victor's encyclopedic knowledge of arcane substances, gleaned from tomes on art restoration, poisons that could mimic patina, absorbed unwittingly. Psychologically, his over-eager protestations betrayed a mind attuned to deception, his composure a facade cracking under scrutiny. "And your familiarity with toxins, monsieur? One hears of restorers employing arsenic to age canvases." Victor's cheeks reddened. "Mere antiquarian lore, nothing sinister." Yet the defense rang hollow, a red herring perhaps, or the thread of truth. Eliza Thorne approached with the timidity of a mouse navigating a cat's domain, her petite form enveloped in her gray uniform, her mousy hair pinned severely. Her gray eyes, downcast in habitual subservience, flickered with the embers of suppressed fury. At 30, she was a cipher of endurance, her psyche scarred by Sir Reginald's tyrannies, reprimands that stung like whips, advances that violated her sanctity. "Master was cruel, sir," she murmured, her voice a tremulous whisper, "slapping me for a smudged vase, cornering me in dim halls." "But murder? I'm no fiend. I was in the kitchen, brewing tea for the guests." Poirot observed a snippet of torn fabric clinging to her sleeve, matching the heavy damask curtains flanking the portrait in the drawing room. "This fragment, mademoiselle. It suggests presence near the artifact." Her eyes widened in alarm. "Must have caught it earlier, sir, nothing more." The clue tantalized. Planted evidence or inadvertent trace? Her motive burned bright. Vengeance for humiliations endured, secrets overheard in shadowed alcoves fueling a quiet rage. Lastly, Thomas Black lumbered in, his burly frame filling the doorway like a sentinel of the earth. His weathered face, etched with the furrows of toil, bore the stoicism of one inured to nature's caprices. Clad in his tweed jacket, his calloused hands clasped before him, his dark eyes smoldered with restrained fury. Psychologically, he was a bastion of quiet endurance, yet a profound grudge rooted deep. Sir Reginald's dismissal of his warnings about the manor's decaying foundations had endangered all, and whispers of his sister's tragic entanglement, abandoned after bearing the master's child, bred eternal enmity. "I warned him about the damp rot in the walls," Thomas growled, his voice rough as gravel. "Could rot a man's soul as sure as stone. Was in the greenhouse, tending the nightshade and such." Poirot noted Thomas's intimacy with poisonous flora, belladonna and hemlock thriving under his care. "These plants, monsieur, they yield toxins akin to our culprit." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Aye, but I ain't no killer, just a gardener." The alibi stood, yet footprints led toward the greenhouse, muddy trails that could conceal nocturnal wanderings. As the interrogations concluded, Poirot rose, pacing the room with the grace of a panther, his cane tapping a rhythmic cadence. The day waned, shadows lengthening like accusatory fingers across the library floor. He examined the portrait anew, his magnifying glass revealing faint residues. Arsenic, yes, but applied with precision, requiring hours to permeate. Access was key, a servant's latchkey, perhaps, or a window left ajar. Red herrings proliferated, a misplaced glove in the hall, scented with Lady Amelia's perfume, a forged note in Sir Reginald's pocket, hinting at suicidal despair. The little inconsistencies, Poirot mused aloud, his voice a soliloquy of insight, They whisper truths to those who listen. One footprint too pristine, one alibi too rehearsed. Ah, the human mind, it betrays itself in the minutiae, does it not? The manor pulsed with unspoken accusations, alliances fracturing under the weight of suspicion. Lady Amelia avoided Arthur's gaze. Victor eyed Eliza with disdain. Thomas stood aloof. The drizzle persisted, a relentless veil obscuring clarity as shadows of suspicion deepened into the encroaching dusk. Poirot, undeterred, sensed the web tightening, the killer's misstep imminent in the symphony of clues. Chapter 3. Veils of Deception. As the afternoon sun pierced the leaden veil of clouds, casting elongated shadows across the manicured lawns of Blackwood Manor, Hercule Poirot ventured deeper into the enigma that enveloped the estate like a shroud of finest silk. The manor, with its labyrinth of chambers and concealed alcoves, seemed to pulse with the residue of unspoken sins, its very architecture a testament to the deceptions of bygone eras. Creaking staircases ascended to attics where dust, motes danced in shafts of pallid light, and hidden drawers in antique bureau guarded confidences long interred. The air grew heavier with each step, laden with the musty essence of forgotten correspondence and the faint, acrid tang of secrets unearthed. Thunder, now distant, grumbled like the discontented mutterings of a conscience burdened, while the drizzle persisted, etching rivulets upon the window panes that distorted the world beyond into a watercolor of ambiguity. Poirot, his compact form navigating the narrow ascent to the attic with the precision of a maestro conducting an intricate fugue, felt the thrill of pursuit invigorate his little gray cells. The attic was a repository of relics, trunks overflowing with yellowed garments, portraits of stern ancestors gazing down with judgmental eyes, and stacks of ledgers bound in cracked leather, their pages inscribed with the arithmetic of fortunes won and lost. It was here, amid this detritus of history, that Poirot's keen gaze alighted upon a ledger concealed beneath a layer of moth-eaten velvet. With gloved hands, for one must preserve the sanctity of evidence, he extracted the volume, its entries revealing Sir Reginald's machinations in stark, unforgiving ink. The art collector had not merely acquired treasures, he had wielded them as weapons. Entries detailed blackmail levied against Victor Lang, payments extorted under threat of exposing forgeries from Victor's early career, sums that had driven the dealer to the brink of penury. "Ah, Monsieur Lang," Poirot murmured to the empty air, his mustache quivering with insight, "your envy transmutes to desperation. Revenge, it is a motive as potent as any poison." Descending from this aerial sanctum, Poirot's inquiries turned to the private quarters, where the veils of deception grew ever more diaphanous. In Lady Amelia's boudoir, a chamber of feminine elegance, with walls papered in delicate florals and a vanity cluttered with crystal vials of perfume, he discovered a hidden compartment within her jewelry casket. Therein lay a bundle of letters, bound with a ribbon of crimson silk, their script flowing with the ardor of forbidden passion. The correspondent, a London barrister named Julian Lansdowne, initials J.L., matching the enigmatic handkerchief, professed undying devotion and schemed for elopement contingent upon Lady Amelia's inheritance. "My dearest," one missive implored, "rid yourself of that tyrant, and we shall flee to Paris, where love blooms unchecked." Psychologically, this revelation illuminated Lady Amelia's facade. Her tears, ostensibly of grief, masked a calculus of liberation. Yet Poirot pondered, were they genuine lamentations or a masterful performance? He observed her later in the gallery, her silhouette framed against the portrait's accusatory gaze, her pacing a ritual of inner turmoil. Her mind, once a garden of restrained blooms, now revealed thorns of ambition and deceit. Her glances toward the artwork, betraying fascination or guilt, a psychological clue as telling as any footprint. Arthur Hawthorne's alibi, that fragile edifice of assertion, began to crumble under Poirot's relentless scrutiny. Resummoned to the library, the nephew fidgeted like a marionette with tangled strings, his green eyes evading the detective's obsidian stare. "The cellar, you claim, monsieur?" Poirot intoned, his voice a silken thread drawing taut. Yet the butler's ledger records the door bolted at 8, with no entry thereafter. A discrepancy, non? Arthur's pallor deepened, beads of perspiration glistening upon his brow like dew on wilted leaves. "A mistake, surely. The old fool errs often," he blustered, his hands clenching the arms of the chair. But Poirot's gray cells whirred, piecing fragments, creditors' missives intercepted from Arthur's chambers, threatened exposure and ruin unless debts were settled forthwith. Inheritance gleamed as his panacea, yet the timeline gnawed. Had he slipped into the portrait room during Sir Reginald's siesta, applying the toxin with gloved precision? Psychologically, Arthur's desperation manifested in impulsivity, his entitlement a veneer cracking to reveal a core of moral elasticity. The footprint outside, once deemed misdirection, now aligned with a side entrance to the cellar, suggesting circuitous paths to alibi fabrication. Eliza Thorne, encountered in the servants' quarters, a dim warren of narrow beds and flickering gas lamps, yielded her confessions with the reluctance of a clam pried from its shell. Seated upon a worn stool, her petite frame hunched in deference, she wrung her apron as if to expel the very essence of her grievances. "Master was a beast, sir," she admitted, her voice a whisper laced with venom, "dismissing my sister years ago after improprieties that left her broken, destitute. She perished in a workhouse, alone." Tears traced paths down her cheeks, yet Poirot discerned authenticity mingled with artifice. Her gray eyes, usually downcast, now flashed with the fire of retribution. A diary, unearthed from beneath her mattress, chronicled indignities, slaps for trifles, cornered embraces in shadowed halls, each entry a testament to a psyche scarred and simmering. "But poison! I'd not soil my hands," she protested, yet the torn fabric from her sleeve, matching the curtains, hinted at proximity. Poirot suspected misdirection, the snippet planted by another to implicate her subservient station. Her motive, vengeance for familial ruin, burned with the intensity of a suppressed inferno, her mind a labyrinth where loyalty warred with loathing. Thomas Black, confronted in the greenhouse amid the humid embrace of exotic flora, revealed his buried truths with the stoicism of earth yielding to the plow. The structure, a glass cathedral of verdant profusion, hummed with the drip of condensation and the scent of loamy soil, nightshade vines twining like serpents about wrought iron frames. His burly form, silhouetted against the panes, exuded the quiet fury of a storm brewing on the horizon. "My sister, I," he growled, his calloused hands pruning a toxic bloom with deliberate snips, "bore his bastard child, abandoned to fate when he cast her out. She withered away, sir, while he reveled in his treasures." Poirot's eyes narrowed at the revelation, a motive rooted in familial vendetta, profound as ancient oaks. Footprints in the mud led hither, physical evidence tying Thomas to nocturnal vigils. Yet the poison was arsenic, not the botanical alkaloids flourishing under his care. A red herring, perhaps, Poirot mused, observing Thomas's demeanor crack only at the invocation of his kin. A psychological fissure, betraying grief's authenticity over cunning's artifice. His psyche, forged in toil and loss, harbored rage as deep as the estate's foundations, yet his alibi held. Witnesses placed him amid the blooms during the critical hours. As twilight descended, veiling the manor in hues of indigo and amethyst, Poirot convened the suspects in the drawing room once more. The chamber, illuminated by the flickering chandelier, pulsed with tension, the portrait's eyes seeming to follow each entrant with silent accusation. Lady Amelia perched rigidly, her fingers tracing the JL handkerchief. Arthur slouched, his gaze darting. Victor polished his spectacles with feigned nonchalance. Eliza hovered by the door, apron twisted. Thomas stood sentinel, arms crossed like barriers. "Mes amis," Poirot declared, his voice resonant as a clarion call, pacing before the fireplace with theatrical poise. The clues accumulate like snow upon the Devonshire moors. A ledger of blackmail, a letter of liaison, a diary of despairs. A torn fabric, a mismatched timeline, a hidden missive. But which is the thread that unravels the tapestry entire? Suspicions fractured the fragile truce. Arthur accused Victor of forgery's revenge, his voice laced with desperation. Lady Amelia eyed Eliza with aristocratic disdain, whispering of servants' treacheries. Victor countered with allusions to Arthur's debts. Eliza's glances toward Thomas hinted at shared grievances. The gardener remained impassive, his silence a fortress. The atmosphere thickened, secrets festering like untreated wounds, the rain's patter, a dirge for innocence lost. Poirot, his obsidian eyes gleaming, allowed the discord to swell, for in chaos, truths often surfaced like flotsam upon turbulent seas. "Patience, for the mind of Hercule Poirot pierces these veils," he assured, a sly smile curling beneath his mustache. "The killer's stratagem, it is clever, but not infallible. The human soul, it leaves traces more indelible than any toxin." As the assembly dispersed into the encroaching night, the manor seemed to hold its breath, the veils of deception thinning, yet not wholly rent asunder. The storm without had abated, but within, the tempest of revelation gathered force. Chapter 4. The Tangled Web, as the mantle of night descended upon Blackwood Manor, enveloping its turrets and gables in a cloak of impenetrable shadow. The wind rose to a crescendo, howling through the chimneys like the wails of tormented souls. Doors slammed in distant wings of the estate, echoing through the corridors with the finality of judgments rendered, while the rain, now a torrential deluge, battered the ancient stone as if seeking to wash away the stains of iniquity. Within this symphony of elemental fury, Hercule Poirot pursued the threads of misdirection with the tenacity of a spider mending its web. The manor's grounds, sodden and treacherous underfoot, beckoned him forth, his patent leather shoes sinking into the mire as he traversed the paths, illuminated only by the sporadic flashes of lightning that rent the heavens asunder. The greenhouse loomed ahead, a fragile bastion of glass and iron amidst the chaos, its panes fogged with the breath of exotic flora thriving in contrived tropics. It was here, amid the humid embrace of nightshade and oleander, that Poirot's search yielded a damning artifact. A small vial of crystalline powder, half buried in the loamy soil beneath a bench strewn with gardening implements. The label, faded but legible, proclaimed it arsenic, precisely the toxin that had felled Sir Reginald. Thomas Black, summoned forthwith from his modest cottage on the estate's periphery, beheld the discovery with eyes widening in unfeigned astonishment, his burly frame tensing like a coiled spring. "Framed!" he roared, his voice a thunderclap that rivaled the storm without, his fists clenching in impotent rage. "I've no use for such poisons. My hands deal in life, not death." Poirot, undeterred by the outburst, observed the gardener's demeanor with the acuity of a clinician diagnosing a malady. Thomas's stoicism, that impregnable facade forged in years of toil and tribulation, cracked only at the invocation of his sister's memory. A fleeting tremor in his jaw, a moistening of his dark eyes suggesting grief's authenticity rather than the cunning artifice of a murderer. Psychologically, this fissure illuminated a soul burdened by loss, not premeditated malice. The vial, devoid of fingerprints save those plausibly Thomas's from routine handling, bore the hallmarks of a clumsy frame, planted to divert suspicion toward the manor's humblest denizen. Undaunted, Poirot turned his gaze inward, retracing his steps to the manor's labyrinthine interiors, where alibis faltered like houses of cards in a gale. Victor Lang's assertions of innocence, once proffered with the oily assurance of a seasoned huckster, now crumbled under the weight of emergent testimony. A footman, hitherto reticent, confessed under Poirot's gentle yet inexorable probing to having glimpsed the art dealer lingering near the portrait room mere hours before the unveiling. Far beyond the cursory appraisal Victor had claimed. Confronted in the billiard room, where cues lay abandoned amid the green baize like relics of frivolity interrupted, Victor adjusted his spectacles with trembling fingers, his waxed mustache drooping in defeat. "Merely appraising the piece anew," he insisted, his voice quavering like a violin string plucked awry. "Sir Reginald demanded perfection. Dust motes, you understand." Yet Poirot discerned the telltale quiver in those pudgy hands, a psychological betrayal of deception's strain. Victor's mind, a forge of envy and calculation, had long simmered with the bile of humiliation. The blackmail ledger unearthed in the attic painted him not as victim, but as a man cornered, his expertise in restorative poisons, a necessity for aging forgeries, transmuted into a weapon of reprisal. The alibi's fracture widened the web, ensnaring Victor in a net of opportunity and motive. Lady Amelia's composure, that fragile edifice of aristocratic poise, likewise showed signs of erosion as Poirot delved into the minutiae of physical evidence. In the laboratory improvised within the butler's pantry, complete with magnifying lenses and chemical reagents procured from the local apothecary, traces of arsenic were detected upon her embroidered handkerchief, that enigmatic token bearing JL initials. Was it accidental transfer, a hapless brushing against the tainted portrait during the chaos of Sir Reginald's collapse? Or damning proof of premeditation? Interrogated in her boudoir, amid the delicate scents of lavender and regret, Lady Amelia clutched the fabric to her breast, her hazel eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "A mere accident, monsieur. In the melee, one touches everything," she protested, her voice a tremulous whisper. Yet Poirot's gray cells whirred, weaving her motive into the tapestry. Liberation from a tyrannical union, fortunes unfettered to fund a new life with her paramour. Psychologically, her facade of grief concealed a core of steely resolve. Her pacing in the gallery, a ritual not of mourning, but of anticipation. The handkerchief's residue, coupled with her access to the portrait during Sir Reginald's afternoon repose, tightened the noose of suspicion, her elegant fingers potentially the instruments of subtle application. Arthur Hawthorne's trail led Poirot to shadowed recesses where avarice and desperation intertwined. The footprint, that pristine impression outside the library window, traced not merely to errant wanderings, but to a concealed safe embedded in the paneling of Sir Reginald's study. A vault now yawning empty, its contents of bearer bonds vanished like mist in the dawn. Discovered during a meticulous search, the safe's door bore signs of tampering, the lock picked with amateurish zeal. Arthur, cornered in the stables where he sought solace amid the equine scents of hay and leather, blanched at the revelation. The bonds! Uncle must have relocated them. I know naught of it, he stammered, his disheveled blonde locks matted with sweat. But Poirot observed the youth's evasive gaze, a psychological hallmark of guilt, compounded by opportunism. Had Arthur, in the throes of post-murder panic, pilfered the securities to fund his escape from creditors' clutches? His motive, inheritance accelerated by poison, interlocked with this theft, the footprint a breadcrumb leading to larceny's lair. Timeline inconsistencies mounted. The poison applied post-luncheon, during Sir Reginald's siesta, when Arthur's alibi of cellar duties proved porous. The bolted door a barrier circumvented perhaps by a forgotten servant's passage. Eliza Thorne's quarters, a Spartan cell in the attics where drafts whispered through ill-fitted eaves, harbored further enigmas. A thorough perusal revealed a diary concealed beneath floorboards, its pages a litany of grievances etched in cramped script, entries chronicling Sir Reginald's cruelties, from verbal lacerations to physical encroachments that left her spirit bruised. He corners me in the dark, his breath foul with port, one passage lamented, promising favors for silence, yet delivering only shame. Amid these confessions lay a red herring of brazen artifice, a forged will, clumsily drafted on stationery pilfered from the study, bequeathing a modest sum to Eliza upon Sir Reginald's demise. "Planted!" she cried upon confrontation, her petite form quivering in the dim light of a single candle, her gray eyes ablaze with indignation. Poirot concurred inwardly. The forgery's amateur strokes suggested a deflector's hand, not the maid's own. Psychologically, Eliza's subservience masked a reservoir of rage, her motive, vengeance for personal and sororal humiliations, a thread woven tightly into the web. Yet the diary's authenticity rang true, her alibis corroborated by kitchen drudges, positioning her as pawn rather than perpetrator. In the solitude of the library, as the storm mirrored the tempest within his mind, Poirot pieced the puzzle with the deliberation of a mosaicist assembling shards. Hidden motives intertwined like vines in an overgrown arbor. Arthur's avarice for money to salve his debts. Thomas and Eliza's shared thirst for revenge against a tyrant's cruelties. Victor's quest for honor restored through retribution. Amelia's yearning for liberation and love unfettered. Timeline fissures yawned wider, the toxin applied between noon and 3, a window of opportunity exploited by all, their movements a ballet of potential deceit. A breakthrough illuminated the gloom. Upon re-examining the portrait under the harsh glare of a gas lamp, Poirot discovered a faint inscription etched upon its backing, a cryptic code, deciphered with his encyclopedic acumen, revealing Sir Reginald's own scheme of forgeries, peddled to unwitting collectors. Who among them knew this secret, this vulnerability that could ruin reputations? The lady's gaze, that enigmatic smile, seemed to mock the assembly, her eyes the silent witnesses to treachery. "Ah, the portrait," Poirot soliloquized to the empty room, his voice a murmur amid the wind's lament. "It is not merely the weapon, but the witness, The deadly clue lies in its gaze, piercing the veils of falsehood. Accusations flew in the ensuing hours, the web tightening to ensnare all in mutual doubt. Victor pointed to Arthur's thefts. Amelia whispered of Eliza's bitterness. Thomas eyed Victor with suspicion, born of the vial's planting. The manor thrummed with discord, doors slamming as alliances fractured, the tangled web drawing ever closer to its unraveling under Poirot's unyielding scrutiny. Chapter 5. The Revelation. As the first tendrils of dawn pierced the tumultuous skies over Blackwood Manor, casting a pallid glow upon the rain-slicked rooftops and the sodden gardens below, Hercule Poirot orchestrated the denouement with the precision of a conductor summoning the final crescendo. The storm, having expended its fury through the night, now subsided to a gentle patter, as if the heavens themselves paused in anticipation of justice's unveiling. The drawing room, that opulent theater of tragedy, served once more as the stage. The colossal fireplace crackled with renewed vigor, its flames leaping like eager spectators, illuminating the walls adorned with Sir Reginald's treasures, now silent witnesses to the drama's resolution. The air hung heavy with the mingled scents of damp wool, beeswax, and the faint lingering acridity of the previous eve's chaos. Crystal chandeliers, their prisms dulled by the gray light filtering through mullioned windows, dangled like suspended judgments, while the portrait of the enigmatic lady presided over all, her smile a cipher of knowing complicity, her eyes following each entrant with an inscrutable gaze that seemed to pierce the veils of pretense. Poirot, his egg-shaped head inclined in contemplative poise, his mustache a paragon of waxed symmetry, stood before the assemblage like a diminutive colossus of intellect. Clad in his impeccable frock coat, he twirled his cane with deliberate flair, his obsidian eyes gleaming with the triumph of deduction. The suspects, summoned by the tolling of the grandfather clock at precisely 7, filed in with the reluctance of actors compelled to their final scene. Lady Amelia Hawthorne, her slender form sheathed in a mourning gown of ebony silk, perched upon the velvet chaise with the fragility of a porcelain doll, her hazel eyes shadowed by the weight of revelations past. Her psyche, once a bastion of restrained resentment, now teetered on the precipice of relief, her fingers absently tracing the JL handkerchief, a talisman of forbidden hopes. Arthur Hawthorne slouched nearby, his lanky frame collapsed into an armchair, his disheveled blonde locks framing a face etched with the pallor of sleepless vigil, his green eyes darting like those of a cornered fox. Desperation had etched his soul, yet the specter of inheritance loomed as a double-edged blade, his mind a whirlwind of avarice and apprehension. Victor Lang, the art dealer, positioned himself by the window as a rotund figure, casting a squat shadow upon the Persian rug, his waxed mustache drooping in uncharacteristic defeat, his brown eyes behind spectacles flickering with the unease of a man sensing the nooses tightening. His psyche, forged in the crucibles of envy and ambition, now betrayed cracks of panic, his hands trembling as they polished an imaginary speck from his cuff. Eliza Thorne hovered at the periphery, her petite form in starched gray uniform a study in subservient vigilance, her mousy hair pinned severely, her gray eyes downcast, yet alight with the embers of vindication. Humiliation had scarred her spirit, but the diary's confessions and the planted will had positioned her as a pawn in a grander game, her mind a repository of observed injustices yearning for absolution. Thomas Black loomed by the door, his burly frame a sentinel of earthen solidity, his weathered face impassive as granite, his dark eyes smoldering with the quiet fury of the unjustly accused. Grief for his sister had rooted his grudge deep, yet the vial's discovery had cast him into suspicion's shadow, his psyche a fortress of endurance now besieged by doubt. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot commenced, his voice a resonant timbre laced with Belgian exactitude, pacing the room with measured steps that echoed upon the oak floors. "The hour of revelation has arrived. Attend, if you please, to the symphony of the little gray cells, for they have composed the truth from the discord of deception. We gather beneath the gaze of this poisoned portrait, that deadly clue which has whispered its secrets to Hercule Poirot alone." He gestured toward the easel, where the lady's enigmatic smile seemed to mock the assembly, her countenance unaltered by the toxin that had claimed her admirer. The room fell into a hush, broken only by the fire's crackle and the distant drip of rain from the eaves, as if the manor itself held its breath. "Let us recapitulate the melody of murder," Poirot continued, his cane tapping rhythmically like a metronome of fate. Sir Reginald Hawthorne, that titan of treasures, succumbed to an arsenic derivative, a contact poison of rare ingenuity, applied to the surface of this masterpiece, absorbed through the skin during his obsessive caresses. The symptoms manifested at the unveiling, yet the application occurred earlier, between noon and 3, when the master slumbered and opportunity beckoned to all. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room, eliciting shifts of unease. Lady Amelia's fingers tightened upon her handkerchief. Arthur averted his gaze. Victor adjusted his spectacles. Eliza wrung her apron. Thomas crossed his arms with a grunt. "The physical evidence," Poirot declared, "weaves a tangled skein. A vial of arsenic in the greenhouse, implicating Monsieur Black, yet unmarred by fingerprints beyond the mundane. A clumsy plant to divert the gaze. A footprint pristine amid the deluge, pointing to Monsieur Hawthorne the younger, yet timed to predate the storm. A misdirection sown in haste. A snippet of fabric from Mademoiselle Thorne's sleeve, matching the curtains, deliberately torn and placed, a red herring to ensnare the innocent. Residue upon Madame Hawthorne's handkerchief, suggesting complicity, yet transferable in the chaos, an accidental trace rather than damning proof. And the emptied safe, its bonds vanished, hinting at theft by the air. Opportunistic, perhaps, but post-mortem, not the act of the killer. He pivoted, his voice swelling with dramatic flair. "Ah, but the psychological clues, they sing louder than any artifact. Madame Hawthorne's grief, a veil for liberation, her letters a map to amorous escape, yet her tears ring true, her pacing a lament, not a celebration. Monsieur Arthur's desperation, a tempest of debt, his entitlement a spur to fantasy, yet impulsivity marks him, not the calculated patience of poison's latency. Mademoiselle Thorne's diary, a chronicle of cruelties, her subservience a mask for rage, yet her vengeance simmers personally, lacking the artistry of this deed. Monsieur Black's stoicism, cracked only by familial grief, his hands calloused for earth, not intrigue, his motive profound, but his methods blunt as a spade. Poirot's gaze alighted upon Victor Lang, who stiffened like a statue sensing the sculptor's chisel. "And you, Monsieur Lang, your psyche, a forge of envy, blackened by blackmail's coals. The ledger reveals Sir Reginald's extortions, your forgeries exposed, your livelihood imperiled, your overeager defenses, your trembling hands. They betray the deceiver's strain." The room tensed, accusations hovering unspoken. "The timeline fractures your alibi. witnessed near the portrait hours prior beyond mere appraisal. Your expertise in restorative poisons, arsenic to mimic patina, absorbed unwittingly, transmutes knowledge to weapon. A murmur rippled through the assembly, Lady Amelia's hand flying to her mouth, Arthur leaning forward in astonishment. "But the breakthrough," Poirot proclaimed, approaching the portrait with reverent steps, "lies in this lady's secret. Upon her backing, an inscription, a code of Sir Reginald's own forgeries, a vulnerability you alone discerned, Monsieur Lang, during your examination. You applied the toxin with gloved precision, knowing his obsession would seal his fate. The vial planted on black, the fabric on thorn, the stirred suspicions. They scatter blame like chaff in the wind. Your flaw, overconfidence, betrayed by those quivering digits." Victor paled, his rotund frame deflating as if pricked by truth's needle. "Enough," he gasped, collapsing into a chair, his voice a broken whisper. "He ruined me. The portrait was my canvas of revenge. I coded it subtly, a masterpiece of malice." Confessions tumbled forth. The Parisian auction a ruse, the toxin procured from shadowy contacts, the frame a bid for redemption through ruin. The assembly exhaled in collective relief, Eliza's eyes widening in vindication, Thomas's fists unclenching, Arthur's shoulders sagging, Lady Amelia's tears flowing freely, grief mingled with liberation. Poirot twirled his mustache, a sly smile curling his lips. "Order and method prevail, mes amis. The poisoned portrait has spoken its deadly clue, and justice she is served." Constables, summoned discreetly, led Victor away in manacles, his protests fading into the corridors like echoes of a faded dream. The manor seemed to sigh, its shadows retreating as dawn's light strengthened, the storm's remnants yielding to tentative serenity. In the aftermath, as the suspects dispersed, Lady Amelia to ponder her future, Arthur to reclaim his inheritance with tempered wisdom, Eliza and Thomas to resume their duties with dignity restored. Poirot lingered by the window, gazing upon the Devonshire hills awakening in verdant splendor. The little gray cells, sated by conquest, hummed contentedly, the enigma unraveled in the grand tradition of intellect over brute force.